I took this photo just a few days ago, actually, outside the Russian embassy in The Hague. These chairs were put here by the relatives of the dead. For them, this image represents absence of their loved ones, but also of justice. On the 17th of July 2014, a passenger jet flying from the Netherlands to Malaysia was shot down over eastern Ukraine by a Russian-made Buk missile. Do you remember this? It was almost 5 years ago now. There were 298 people on board Flight MH17. 80 of them were children. No one survived. The Dutch call this their 9/11, but while the attacks in the US ignited a war on terror, until yesterday, the most striking thing about the Netherlands reaction was the lack of it. Back in 2014, most people in the Netherlands were only vaguely aware of the proxy war raging more than 1,000 miles away. Pro-Russian separatists fighting the Ukrainian army after Moscow's annexation of Crimea. The overwhelming sense amongst the Dutch was, this is a foreign affair, until photos of Dutch passports and luggage strewn among the twisted wreckage of the plane were beamed into people's living rooms. And suddenly, this conflict was brought home. The day the bodies were eventually repatriated to the Netherlands is ingrained in the country's collective memory. I vividly remember this day too. Flags representing the 10 nationalities of the crew and passengers on board billowed at half-mast. Hans de Borst was watching on the tarmac, desperately, silently hoping that the body of his 17-year-old daughter, Elsemiek, was among those being brought home. Elsemiek de Borst loved exotic adventures. She was studying to be an architect. I first met Hans there at his home in the small Dutch town of Monster. His living room had been transformed into a shrine to his only child. There was a life-size poster of Elsemiek on the wall, candles burning, and a sign with a phrase they used to always say to each other, "I love you, to the moon and back again." It was like this across whole neighborhoods, like time had just stopped. Cars parked in driveways, empty swings in gardens, beds like Bryce and Daisy's left unmade as they rushed to catch that flight. A few days later, I interviewed the Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte for the BBC.
Somewhere there's someone who put their finger on a button and fired that missile. What's your message to that person?
That he can be assured that I am extremely motivated to find him, her or them, and that as soon as we do, that they won't escape justice.
I don't know about you, but I was slightly frustrated by what seemed to be a robotic response, at least in contrast to the raw anguish I'd seen at the airfield. And as soon as the cameras stopped rolling, the Prime Minister came over and tried to reassure me that this was the best approach. We need to wait and do things properly. And then he said, we get the truth. So, Holland waited. And the Kremlin began to pump out conflicting theories. It's estimated the Russian troll factory pumped out 35,000, 65,000 tweets in the 2 days after Flight MH17 was shot down. I watched the drip of bizarre claims cast the blame everywhere but Moscow. One story said the flight had been deliberately sent over a war zone. Another, that it was shot down by Ukrainian forces. Among the most far-fetched was that Flight MH17 was actually the Malaysian plane that had disappeared over the Indian Ocean 3 months before. All of this cast doubt, raised division, central goals of Russian disinformation campaigns. And despite the overwhelming evidence of Russia's complicity, the Dutch still haven't brought anyone to justice. But then yesterday, did you see the news? 4 suspects, the first 4 suspects have been named. 3 Russian nationals and 1 Ukrainian, now all accused of mass murder. They still need more witnesses, but this is the first real step to justice and brings the family closer to what they really want, the truth. In the days after the crash, Hans wrote an open letter asking his daughter's murderers to confess to their crime. Thanks a lot, Mr. Putin, rebels, leaders of the Ukrainian government, for killing my sweet and only child. This was a rare show of anger for Hans, and he also criticized his own government for being too soft in its response. Back in The Hague, the internationally recognized city of peace and justice, every year the relatives come together. They make a special effort to make sure people, we, don't forget. They lay these chairs in the exact formation of the plane and then walk around and put flowers on the exact seat numbers where they knew their loved ones had sat.
All those people who died, and you saw with the chairs how many there are, they can't talk anymore. And we can. And so as long as I live, I can talk for them.
It's almost 5 years now, and their greatest fear is that all the disinformation and alternative facts have reduced the chances of them ever getting justice. Hans and his friends put this bench on the grass right across from the Russian embassy. It says, waiting for full clarity and responsibility, in loving memory of his 17-year-old daughter, Elsamik, and the 297 other people who were on board that plane.